Hi, I'm Susan, and welcome to Tasty Cakes, where I make American baked goods one recipe at a time. Today's City Tavern recipe is Thomas Jefferson's sweet potato biscuits. And while this isn't his exact recipe, it was supposedly inspired by two crops that he eagerly cultivated in Virginia: sweet potatoes and my favorite nut, pecans. So, the first thing I'm going to do is get those pecans toasting in the oven as I prep everything else. And as I said before, it's always best to toast your nuts. It's going to improve the flavor overall. So, biscuit recipe typically tends to be really sticky and messy. So, actually, before I start anything, I'm getting all my utensils and bowls ready. And then it's time to pull all of our dry ingredients together, which includes a boatload of flour and two kinds of sugar. And today I'm actually going to use real brown sugar. What I can find here is called muscovado, which has the same feel as the brown sugar we have at home, but it's a little bit darker. Functions the same way. Measure it out, pack it down, and then I'm going to add white sugar on top of it. And then pull that all together because it does come out in a big clump, and I want to make sure it's as evenly distributed in the flour as possible. And then we get to the rest of the dry ingredients, which include baking powder as our leavener, a healthy dose of some cinnamon. Always want to add in a little bit of salt because that is, again, going to elevate the flavor, whether it's sweet or savory. Some dried ginger, powdered ginger, which came out in clumps. So then I decided to give it a little bit of a sift. So again, we don't have big chunks of ginger. That's not very pleasant. And finally, finishing up with some ground allspice, giving that all a good whisk. And then again, with a spoon to mash up any big chunks of the brown sugar. Pecans are done. Giving them a little shake to make sure they're good, setting them off to get cooled while I'm dealing with the fats. So this recipe calls for vegetable shortening, which is basically Crisco. Easy to find in the US, not as easy to come by, plus it's more expensive here in Spain. So what I end up deciding to do is use half vegetable shortening. It is a lower melting point, so it's a little bit easier to work with. But then the other half, I'm just going to use straight up butter. A little bit more difficult to work with, but it's a better flavor. So I've measured out my Crisco. That goes directly into the dry ingredients while I'm prepping my butter. And because I want the butter to stay as cool as possible, I'm going to work as quickly as I can, but I'm also going to make sure that my butter is chunked into pieces that are about the same size. That's going to make it a little bit easier to pull everything together. And I should have used a different cutting board. This one has a tendency to not behave very easily or very well, but it is what it is. So all of my fat is in the bowl with my dry ingredients. There's three ways I'm going to bring this together. First, I just start with two knives to kind of break up the big chunks, get the Crisco into smaller chunks. And I'm not using the heat of my hands. And once I get tired of doing that, I'm going to use this fun device called a pastry cutter and kind of mush it all together to break the fat up into smaller pieces. And then once my hand gets tired with that, I'm just going to get in there and mush the rest with my fingertips until it looks like a coarse cornmeal. It's okay if there's some bigger chunks and smaller chunks still. That's not a problem. I'm going to double check the recipe. The next thing I do is add in my mushed and pureed sweet potato. I did this the day before. I'm cheating a little bit. You're not seeing that part of it. I just put 2 sweet potatoes in the oven, wrapped them in foil, baked them for a couple hours. So here we go, carefully pulling it together. This is just basically to blend the dry ingredients with a sweet potato, make sure there's no massive clumps of sweet potato. That's not going to be very pleasant when they bake up. So that's as good as it's going to get. I'm going to go ahead and pull things together a little bit, clean up a little bit first, and then go ahead and chop up my pecans. That's going to go in now before the final step, which is adding the liquid and bringing the dough completely together. So pecans are chopped, and I want all of that pecan dust in there because that is just going to increase the pecan flavor overall. I don't want to waste that. All right, last thing I'm doing is adding the liquid. I like to call this the naughty liquid, which is full fat cream. It's even more rich. And again, this is the messy step. So I'm going to pull everything out that I need to get out so that I'm not messing up containers and handles and things as such. A little bit of cream in first to kind of wet the majority of the dry ingredients and everything doesn't go flying everywhere. carefully folding it. It's okay if there's a little bit of flour that is still dry, and it's not completely combined. The more you work with this type of dough, the more likely you are to activate the gluten, which is going to make it chewy. And for these types of biscuits, and actually for a lot of the baked goods that I make, you do not want it to be chewy. You'd rather it to be light and fluffy and flaky. So just until basically everything is wet is enough. That's good to go. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to go ahead and put a healthy dose of flour on my countertop because we do not want this to stick to the table as we're pulling it out. And then it's time to roll everything out. And in the end, I decided to not roll it because there was no reason for me to dirty the rolling pin. Put a little bit of light flour on there to keep my hands from getting super, super sticky, and just mashed it down with my hands. Yes, this means that there could be thicker and thinner in places, but if you see I start using more of my palm, and that just helps it become even. Take a step back, take a quick look, mash down any thicker spots. That's just going to help it when it bakes up. We don't want a biscuit to be half super dry, half super wet. I'm going to use this. It's about a 2.5, 3-inch round. Actually, I think it's 2.5 round cookie cutter, and then cut out my biscuits. And there was a lot of dough. There ended up being a lot of biscuits, but there you go. That's what it looks like. You can see there's some bigger pieces of sweet potato still, some little specks of brown sugar. I personally like that just because it makes it look a little bit more rustic, and gives it some character. I'm going to use up every single bit of dough that I have. I don't want to waste this because I can tell these are going to be fantastic. So they're ready to go in the oven, which preheated to 400, and then I turned it down to 350 when they went in. And I think it was about 18 to 20 minutes, which gave me just enough time to do my cleanup. And by the time that was done, I still had time to kind of, do a little dance, do a little bit more cleaning. I started getting a little impatient because they started to smell fabulous and they were really puffing up nicely in the oven. But thankfully, it wasn't too long of a wait. Here they come. Timer goes off. And let me tell you, the oven and the kitchen smelled amazing. They looked beautiful, nice and puffy and cracked when they came out. And I will tell you, I had a very difficult time to not eat them all in one go. Beautifully spiced, super rich, and absolute great sweet potato flavor. So there you go. Thomas Jefferson sweet potato biscuits. Thanks for stopping by, and I look forward to see you again at the next recipe.